Growing up as kids, my mom used to tell us that we did not react the way she wanted us to react when we opened up Christmas presents. We weren't as audibly and physically excited as she had preferred us. And it wasn't until grandkids came along that all changed. And then when they would open up a gift, right, and they would lose their mind over the gift that they would have, Mom would sit back in pure joy and be like, now this is what I wanted all of those years that we were growing up. And so it wasn't that my sisters and I, we weren't excited about the gifts we got. We were, right? But we just weren't those that would just lose our minds over that. And it wasn't until the grandkids came along and they would open up a gift and it would be something that if their parents gave it to them, they would not be excited about it. But the grandparents did. So it's amazing. And they would lose their minds over it. Now, I don't know about you if that sounds familiar to your household growing up. Like if in your house, right, you have those kids who you give them a gift and it's a normal gift that you're like, nah, it's going to be fine. But they lose their minds over it. Like they're very expressive about it. And then you have others in your family, whether that be your immediate family or extended family, they open up a gift and they're just like, this is great. Thank you. And then they're on to the next. And you're left wondering whether they liked it or not. Right? Going like, well, maybe the next one, you'll like it a little bit more. Because the reactions can be so different as far as what we experience within our families. And so what we're going to do this morning is I want us to look at a reaction. We're going to look at a reaction between two different groups, between Herod and between this group of wise men that we're about to read about. And they're reacting to the birth of this young king that we're going to see in Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. And so we're going to read that this morning, and then we will continue to study this passage. So let's start in verse 1 of Matthew chapter 2. It says, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, 'Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him.' And when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all of the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ must be born. And they told him, 'In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who shall shepherd my people Israel.' Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And when he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, 'Go and search diligently for the child. And when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him.' After listening to the king, they went on their way. And behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way." So here we have these two entities that we want to look at, Herod and the wise men. So if we're going to just understand who they are a little bit, let's start with Herod first to understand who he was. So his name is Herod that we see in Scripture. Also in history, we call him Herod the Great, Herod the First. Even though he's called Herod the First, he's actually the second Herod. So the Herod dynasty, if you will, started in 47 BC with Herod the Great, the one we're reading about here, his father, he was the one that was ruling and reigning in Judea first. Now, Judea is what we would call modern day Israel today. And so it was a province of the larger Roman Empire. And so the way the Roman Empire would work is they would install governors, rulers, kings, if you will, over different reaches of the massive Roman Empire kingdom. And they would be an extension of the power of Caesar within that particular area. So in the Judea area, the one that was the extension of Caesar and his power and everything they represented was this King Herod. So he's the second in line in this family, and because of the role that he and his family hold in the Roman Empire, they are given a lot of power, a lot of prestige, and a lot of authority that came with this position. So if, as the ruler of Judea, when they needed something militarily done, well, he was the one that was going to be in charge of the military. Also, he was the one making sure that the finances were where they needed to be for that particular area, or if there needed to be taxes levied against the people. He was the one that was going to bring those things about. And so he was, to some degree, the representative of Caesar in the Judean area. He was the one that they looked to as that he was laying out the law that came down from Caesar to the people that were living in Judea. And so because of this position that he had, there was a lot of power, there was a lot of privilege, a lot of pride, a lot of family pride that was resting on his shoulders that he had within this position. So there's a lot riding on him keeping this position. I mean, you lose all of those things. Not only does it affect you, but it affects your family lineage. And so there's a lot riding on him, ensuring that he is going to remain king. So this is Herod the Great. Now, if we were to look at the wise men here and look at and try to understand them, there's a little bit more mystery that surrounds these wise men than it does so with Herod. And so one of the things that we look at when we look at the wise men is we don't know exactly how many of them came to see young Jesus. We assume 3, and historically we've said 3 because there's 3 gifts that are brought to baby Jesus. And so we've equated that with 1 gift per person. But the text actually doesn't say how many wise men actually came. And so it could have been 2. We know it was more than 1 because they're called wise men, right? Not wise man. And so there's more than 1 that comes. We know there's at least 2 and then up, but we don't know if it was 3 or it could have been more. We don't know, but we just look at the gifts and go, hey, these gifts, 3 gifts. So it makes sense that there would be 3 wise men that came. And so we're not quite sure of the number, but then there's also some mystery about where they came from. Where did these men come from? One of the theories that's out there from scholars is that they believe they could be astrologers from the land of the Nabateans, which is what we would call modern-day Saudi Arabia, within that area, that they actually traveled up from that area. There's some that would hold to that. There's others that would say that they actually extended from what we would call, or now as modern-day Iran, but was ancient Babylon. And so if you know anything about ancient history, you know that the Babylonians were a force to be reckoned with in the ancient world. And so what they would say is they're actually like the descendants of those from the people of Israel that were living in ancient Babylon. So to explain what this means for a moment, when we see the history of Israel, there's a moment in which the Babylonian Empire comes over to overtake Israel. And when they overtake Israel, part of what they would do is they would take the young wise men of that culture, they would deport them over to the capital of Babylon, and they would become wise men, or they would become those who would give advice to the king. And so there are some scholars who would look at this and say, actually, what we have here is we have a lineage of people that started at what we see in the book of Daniel with this deportation of these wise men. And so we have Daniel and then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the story that if you grew up in Sunday school that you may be familiar with. These guys are all wise men of Israel that were advising the king. And this is actually the lineage of those wise men that are now traveling back to ancient Israel because they're familiar with some of the prophecies that are in the book of Daniel. So again, there's some prophecies that they would look at in the book of Daniel that talks about a rising star that they would look at and say, this is why they traveled and they followed it. And so now if you push me on it, that's probably where I would land. I think that's probably accurate as to who these wise men are, why they and why they came the way they did. But if you ever hear another preacher or someone else, you read something else and somebody says, oh, it was actually these wise men were from there, they have a valid reason for saying that too, right? There's some mystery, again, that's surrounding there. I can tell you what I think is true there, but again, you very well could possibly sit in a different church one day and somebody's like, this is astrologers from the Nabateans, that they have a reason for saying that too, right? There's good evidence for it, and that's why they would lean into it. But I think it helps us to see it from them coming from ancient Babylon. But regardless of that, that is not the purpose of this sermon. The purpose of the sermon is to look at the reaction of these two groups. And so we have an understanding, a basis of an understanding of who Herod was and who these wise men are. Now, let's look at the reaction of these two groups. So again, let's look at Herod first. The first thing we see about Herod is it says that he is troubled. He hears this news and he's troubled. This is a word that means to the rise of fear and dread. All right. And so my daughter would call this the heats. Okay. You know that moment where you get all clammy and you get worried about something that's going to happen? Think back to when you were a kid and you did something that you weren't supposed to do and you were fearful of getting caught, and that moment of panic that began to rise in you, it's called the heats. And so that's what we're talking about here. So let's just say hypothetically that you were throwing a ball in a house one day and you broke one of your mom's collectible plates that you were told not to throw a ball in the house because you could break one of those plates. Hypothetically speaking, if that were to happen to you as a kid, then that type of feeling may rise within you, but just that moment of going like fear and dread. And not only did this affect Herod, it says it affected all of Jerusalem. So there's this news that this new king has arrived, and they begin to have this moment of they're troubled. And he's troubled, again, if we go back to his position, because there's a lot riding on his kingship. He loses it. This is bad news. Power, influence, money, the family lineage, all of those things are gone. And so clearly Herod, being king, if he hears that there's another king, he's troubled. He's troubled in his spirit. But then also this leads them, this stirring in his heart then leads him to feel threatened. So the moment he hears about this new king, he begins to try to figure out who and where this child was going to be born. So he pulls in all the scribes, all the ones who would study the Old Testament scriptures and the prophecies and pull them in. And what is he trying to determine? Where is this king going to be born? Pulls in the wise men. When did you see this rising of the star? So I know how old this child is going to be. Why is he doing that? Because he feels threatened. His king, his throne could be overturned at any moment. So he feels threatened. Well, then that leads him even more to reaction here, the reaction of being deceitful. So he goes to those wise men under the guise of worship. Let me go and worship him too. He goes and asks for information. Why? Because he feels threatened, because he is troubled in his heart. So what does he do? He feels backed into a corner, and he's going to get out of that corner by any means necessary, just like we would, right? You get placed into a position in which you feel threatened. What do? There is any means necessary to get out of that situation. The easy means for him is just to lie about why he wants to know this information. Well, I'm going to go worship him too, because he needs to know that information. And then we see his last reaction is one of anger. So the wise men are told in a dream at the end of our reading that they are not to return to Herod. If we were to continue on reading in chapter 2, we would see that an angel comes to Joseph and tells him to take Mary and his son to Egypt to flee. The reason they're told to go to Egypt is because in verses 16 through 18, Herod then realizes the wise men didn't come back to him. So in a fit of rage, he issues an edict in which all males under the age of 2 are to be murdered. Why does he go to this? All because his position as king has been threatened. Again, backed into a corner, he's going to do whatever means necessary to protect his throne. And so this is the reaction that we see of Herod to this news of this young king. Now, let's look at the reaction of the wise men. The wise men, obviously, you saw on your handout there, but we can expect it's going to be opposite of what we see in Herod. And so the first thing that we see within the wise men is that they're humble. They take a posture of humility here. They are seeking after the king. Why? To worship him. This is why they're seeking after him. So you see within there's a level of humility that they have. They may be considered wise men, but they don't think they should be king. Maybe that's the key to their wisdom, right? Like it's a play of that we see within there is they understand that is not the position they are to have. The position they are simply to have is to do what they are called to do, to know their role. And so they're going, they have a level of humility in their approach to this king. We want to find him so we can worship him. But then also we see there's a level of obedience. Their reaction is one of obedience. So they see the star arise. Now, again, we are looking at Old Testament prophecy is what most would say. They would look back at this. They see the star arise, knowing this signals something significant. And so they then move because of that. Now, we don't know if this star was like, there's some scholars that would say it's the joining of planets to align, and that's why it was bright. There's some that would lean to that. There are others that would just be like, I mean, if God can create like the world out of nothing, if he wanted to put a star that was brighter for a little bit, I think he has the ability to do it. There's others who would be like, hey, this is figurative language that talks about like the guiding of God's presence over the wise men into where Jesus was born, regardless of what your view is there. The point is that the wise men were obedient to what they needed to do. They were like, we need to follow this thing. And so what do? They follow it. So they're obedient to this young king, but then also they're joyful. I love the phrase that we see in Matthew chapter 2 when they get to Jesus, and it says, when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. Exceedingly with great joy. So this is like, this is the grandkid type of reaction that we're talking about here. This is the one where they get super pumped about seeing this star. The way it's written, you can tell like the double emphasis that we see there, because they're rejoiced exceedingly. That means they were really excited with great joy. So it's like Matthew is piling in all the words that he possibly can for us to understand the joy that is overcoming them at this particular moment. So if you think about the happiest you've ever been in your entire life, whatever that moment was, this is what we're talking about here when the wise men see the star and it rests over where Jesus is. There's a deep, deep sense of joy that rises within them. And then lastly, we see that this then leads them to this worshipful reaction. They come and they lay their gifts before this young king. Now, could you imagine for a moment? Jesus is hanging out in the house with Mary, doing whatever young Jesus is doing at that particular moment. There's a knock at Mary's door. She opens it. There's these wise men. We don't, again, know how many. We'll just say 3 that are standing there she's never met before. And they have gifts to present to your son. And you know that he's special. You've been told this, and you've been studying this, and you know how special he's going to be. But at that moment, there's a realization that God is doing much bigger things than what you can perceive even with your own eyes. And you watch them come in and present these 3 gifts to your son and bow down and worship him. Can you imagine in that moment where she's going, like, I thought I knew who he was, but this is wild. Like, how in the world is this taking place? And so you see the reaction difference between that of Herod and the wise men in this particular moment. But within these 2 reactions, what it does is it allows us to have a mirror to look into, to ask ourselves this key question. And that question is, what will our reaction to this king be like? What is my reaction to this king, to this young king? And how we answer that question of how we react to this king is based on how we view this king. Knowing the heart of this king is going to determine how we react to this king. So Herod here, the way he responds to King Jesus is because he responds out of fear. He responds out of fear. Again, going back to his position and the power that he holds, he's afraid of losing his kingdom. He could lose his power. He can lose his influence. He can loses his family's reputation. All of this is riding on him staying on the throne. So if there is something that's going to threaten his throne and dethrone him, then he's going to do whatever he needs to do to protect that throne. Hence why in verses 16, 17, and 18, he goes to the extreme measures that he does. Why? Because he doesn't want to give up the throne and everything that comes with it. And while we rightly love to villainize Herod within the story, his reaction actually isn't too uncommon for all of humanity. Now, it pushes it to the extreme, for sure. But the reaction of being protective of the throne that we find ourselves sitting on is not so foreign to us. That many times the reason that we don't want to follow Jesus is because we don't want to give up our own kingship. We don't want someone else to be king. And so as humans, we believe and we act as if we're in charge of everything. And we do not like the idea of following after another king, for removing ourselves from the throne of our lives and placing another king there. Why? Because that means we're giving up control. That means that we're having to trust over everything to another king. That means we have to obey someone else. And you can ask any 3-year-old, obedience is not fun. We don't enjoy that. And so we struggle to give up our throne, but then we will do whatever we need to do to protect that throne. And we'll come up with clever ways of describing it. So it may be that we don't want to follow after Jesus because we'll say, like, we've got time to do that in the future. Life is long. I don't want to do that right now because, again, I don't want to give control of my life over to someone else and then prevents me from doing what I want to do. So therefore, I'll just do it when I get older. When I get older, that's when I'll follow after King Jesus. And so we'll couch it in that language. Or we will couch it in the language of logic. And we'll go, I don't want to follow after Jesus. Even though there's something that's pulling me that way, I'm not going to trust in it because it doesn't make logical sense. A virgin giving birth to a baby? I can't do this. I can't get down with that. So therefore, I'm not going to follow after Jesus. And so we'll couch it in logic. Or we may then decide, if that's not it, we may say we don't want to follow after this king. We don't want to let Jesus be the king of our lives because our life is fine completely the way it is as me as king. I've got everything I want. House is great. Family's great. Car's great. Finances are great. Life's great. Kids are doing everything they want to do. Life is perfect. And I'm in king of my life right now. So therefore, why would I give up my life in everything that comes with it in order to place Jesus on the throne and not know what that's going to look like? I like to be in control. My life is great. So why would I give it over to Jesus now? But regardless of whatever excuse that we would give for not allowing Jesus to be the king over our lives, every single excuse that we could ever give is all based in that we're fearful of him being on the throne. We're fearful of giving up control over our old lives. We're fearful of removing him from being the king and removing ourselves from being the king and placing him on the throne. Even for the Christ followers in the room, we do the same thing. We may have removed Jesus from the throne of our lives, or removed ourselves from the throne of our lives and placed Jesus there, but yet we still will want to crawl up and try to dethrone him at moments. It's why, we struggle with pursuing after selfless acts as much as we pursue after the selfish things that we want. It's why we see the commands of Jesus and we think that Jesus is talking to someone else when he says, go and therefore make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And we look and we're like, that's somebody else's job, not me. We can look at our king and say that. Why? Because we're wanting to dethrone him in that moment. You're king, but you don't have the right to tell me what to do. I don't like that. I fight against that. And so whatever reaction we have, it's all because it's based in fear. And we are fearful of Jesus being king over our lives because we don't rightly see his place as king. We've confused ourselves. We're not seeing our role clearly and his role clearly. But the wise men in this story, they are the ones that have the right view of this young king. They know that they are not good kings and that they do not belong on a throne. It is their job to find this king, to worship him, and to obey him. They know this is my job. This is his job. This is my job. So the wise men respond to King Jesus in the way they do because of trust. Because of trust. And I can't help but wonder if this goes back to their job as wise men, watching the stars, seeing the stars, that they are fully aware that they are not in control of things. If you go out tonight, and if there's a clear sky, you look up and you see all of the stars that are up there, you will be reminded that you did nothing to put them there. You will be reminded that you do nothing to keep them there, to keep them burning, or to decide when one of them is going to go out. They are reminded just by looking at the stars that they are not in control, that the world that they belong to is a lot bigger than what they can possibly control within their own being. And so they're going, I am not king. There is someone who is a lot more powerful than me that is holding all of this thing together. And so it could very well be just their observation of the skies alone allow them to understand that they need to trust in someone who is larger than they are. And so it is really easy for them to give up their throne when they're going, it's a facade that I had a throne to begin with. They're going, I don't have a throne. I have a little chair at the kids' table that I get to pull up here. That's where I am. They fully understand that they're not in control of life, that they were never meant to be in control of life. Because the truth is, as humans, make really lousy kings. I mean, nobody looks back on the Middle Ages and be like, that was the peak of human history. Even now, we don't look at those who are ruling and reigning over the world and say, they're doing such a good job. Wise decisions all over the place, justice being carried out, peace on earth. Like, look at how well we're doing at being our own kings. No one says that. Even from a political side, we can look at it and be like, we are not good kings. We do not rule well and fairly and justly and righteously. We don't do that well. But even within our own lives, we understand that we are lousy kings. We were never meant to be the one that is worshiped. We were always meant to be the ones that do the worshiping. That is the way we were designed. We were designed to lean into the one that is in control of all things. That's the one we are to worship. I mean, this story reminds us of that. Look at the end result of the one who refuses to give up his throne. Where does that then lead to? Death. But the one who does give up his throne, and they follow and worship after Jesus, where does that end up? Exceedingly great joy. And who doesn't want that in life? Nobody reads Matthew chapter 2 and be like, I really want to be Herod. No. You read it and go, I really want to be one of the wise men. Could you imagine being in that moment, this young king, laying your best before him, going, I don't know what all you're going to do, but it is going to be phenomenal. The stars have told about you coming. The prophets have told about you coming. And I don't know what it's going to look like, but whatever it looks like, I'm with you. That's the ones we want to be with in the story. We want to be with the ones who are exceedingly filled with great joy. How are they filled with exceedingly great joy? It's because in the moment they are humble, they are hopeful, they are obedient, because they know their rightful place. He is king, and I am not. And my whole job is to make a big deal about this king. And so as we are fastly approaching Christmas, it wasn't this morning I woke up and I walked in my office and I was like, oh my goodness, Christmas Eve is 2 days away. I don't know why it did not hit, but it just smacked me this morning of going, man, it is right here. And how important it is for us 2 days away from Christmas Eve, when everything begins to really kick off, right? That we ask and wrestle with the question of what is our reaction to this returning king? Because he's going to come back. Just like he said the first time he was going to come, he's going to come back. So what, in the meantime, in the waiting, what is our reaction to this king? Is it going to be one where we refuse to get off the throne of our own lives in order to give him control over because we're fearful of giving it up and what that may mean? If that is you, if you struggle to just follow after Jesus because you know what that means, let me just ask you this morning to think upon the question of, what are you afraid of? Because here's the deal. Life is too hard for you to think that you can control it all. So what are you fearful of giving up to a good king? Ask yourself that question this morning. Or if you're sitting in the room and you're a Christ follower, Jesus is sitting on the throne of your life. You are no longer there. But why is it that you go up and you pull on his pant leg trying to get him to come down? Because you're like, just let me sit up there for 1 second. What is it that he is calling you to do? And it could be something very simple, like pray over someone, or it could be something very massive. I don't know. But what is it that he's calling you to do? As the king, he is telling you to do it, and you are going, but I don't think that's a good idea. Or maybe there's some of us in this room this morning that we need to sit, and maybe we've come to the place where we're going, I need to remind myself every day of my life that Jesus is king. Not because I'm refusing that, but just because that's the only way I'm going to make it through tomorrow. Or that's going to be the only way that I can do what he's called me to do, is if I remind myself that he is the king.